All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're looking at 3D generative AI. And we've got two pretty different sources to work with today. On the one hand, we've got this really fun music video from NVIDIA developer.
One, two, three. So if you're ready, and if you let me, I wanna see it in motion in 3D. You won't regret me. Champagne confetti. I wanna see it in motion in 3D. 'Cause you know I like it, girl. 3D. You know I like it, girl. 3D. I just wanna see you like that.
You know, those guys who make all those crazy, powerful graphics cards. And it's basically just, showing off like the wow factor of this tech. And then on the other hand, we have NVIDIA's research page about deep imagination.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see those two things next to each other. I mean, you've got this playful music video that's, catchy and everything, and then this dense research page that's just like a wall of text and information.
Yeah, and speaking of catchy, that music from that video, you've probably heard it already, right? Because you know how I like it, girl, 3D. You know how I like it, girl, 3D.
Yeah.
I bet you can't get that out of your head now. But hey, you cut catchy tunes aside, it does make you wonder, like, what is 3D generative AI, and why is NVIDIA putting so much energy into it?
Yeah, it's definitely more than just a catchy tune. It's really changing the way that people are creating stuff in the digital world. Imagine instead of having to model every single detail of like a 3D object by hand, you could basically just give the computer a set of instructions and let it imagine the rest.
It's like AI artists. That sounds kind of like sci-fi to me.
Well, yeah, in a way it is. It uses these things called neural networks, which are basically these complex algorithms that can learn from massive data sets. And those data sets are full of existing 3D models. So the AI uses all that knowledge that it's learned to generate new objects, all based on the parameters that you set.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this right. Instead of me like trying to sculpt a 3D model of something, like say I wanted to make a 3D model of like a spaceship, I could feed the AI a bunch of pictures of spaceships and tell it like what kind of spaceship I'm thinking of, and it would just create it for me.
Exactly. And this isn't just something that might happen in the future. NVIDIA has already released tools that do this, like Edify 3D, which is what that music video is about.
So this isn't just research then, they're actually building real world applications with this stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And this is where it gets really interesting. If you look at NVIDIA's Deep Imagination research page, you can kind of see how big their ambitions are. They're not just focused on creating objects. They're talking about generating entire virtual worlds.
Hold on, wait. Entire virtual worlds. What would that even look like?
Think about it. You could have AI creating these super realistic 3D environments for anything, like architectural simulations, or even training grounds for self-driving cars.
So it's a lot more than just spaceships then. NVIDIA is building these tools, but what are some of the practical things they're talking about in their research? Like where could this stuff actually make a difference?
Well, they talk about some pretty cool applications. Like imagine creating a digital twin of a whole city. You could use 3D generative AI to model every building, every street, even like the flow of traffic, all in a virtual environment.
That's actually a really cool idea. You could test out different scenarios and see how they play out before you actually build anything in the real world.
Exactly. And they also talk about the potential for training self-driving cars. You could create these really realistic simulations of different road conditions, like weather, pedestrians, all that stuff, and then use that to train AI drivers in a safe environment.
So this 3D generative AI is already doing some big things, like in architecture and self-driving cars. It's not just about making cool visuals anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And the potential goes way beyond just those fields. We're talking gaming, healthcare, manufacturing. It's hard to think of an industry that this won't affect in some way.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to think about all the possibilities, but it also makes you wonder about the challenges too, right? I mean, this is some really powerful technology. Are there any concerns or limitations that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's something that we'll definitely talk more about as we dig deeper into these sources. One thing that I noticed in NVIDIA's research is that this technology can be really resource intensive. Like you need a ton of data and processing power to train these AI models.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're talking about like creating entire virtual worlds, I can imagine it takes a lot of computing power to pull that off. So is this only for like big companies with huge budgets then? What about smaller developers or like independent creators?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, there's definitely like a barrier to entry. But like any new technology, things are changing pretty quickly. We're already starting to see more affordable tools and platforms that are, more accessible so that smaller teams can at least experiment with 3D generative AI.
So it's kind of like the early days of computers then. What used to be only for big institutions is now becoming more available to everyone.
Exactly. And it seems like NVIDIA is actually trying to push for wider adoption. They're releasing open source tools and frameworks so that developers can contribute and build their own applications.
That's really cool. It sounds like they're not just trying to keep this tech to themselves. They actually want people to collaborate and innovate.
Yeah, exactly. And that open approach is probably a big reason why we're seeing so much progress in this field. Researchers and developers are building on each other's work and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
So you mentioned earlier that there are some challenges with this tech. Besides the resource requirements, what are some of the other things we should be thinking about?
Well, one of the big questions with AI is always control. With traditional 3D modeling, you have total control over the design. But with 3D generative AI, you're kind of giving some of that control to the algorithm.
Interesting. So it's more like you're giving the AI some guidelines,
Yeah.
but you're not necessarily in charge of every little detail of the final product.
Exactly. And that can be good or bad. On the one hand, it lets you be more creative, and you can get some unexpected results that you might not get with traditional methods. But on the other hand, it could be tough to make sure the output is exactly what you want.
So there's like a trade-off. You get speed and efficiency, but you might lose some control. It makes me wonder how this will affect artists and designers.
That's a great question. A lot of people are worried that AI will replace human creativity. But I think it's more likely that it'll just change how we work.
Change how we work. How so?
Instead of thinking of AI as a replacement for humans, maybe it's better to think of it as a new tool. It can help us automate boring tasks, come up with new ideas, and explore possibilities that we might not have thought of on our own. But in the end, it's still up to the human artist or designer to guide the process and make sure the final product is good.
I like that way of looking at it. It's not about humans versus machines. It's about humans and AI working together.
Exactly. And as this technology keeps getting better, I think we'll see even more cool collaborations between humans and AI.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential, the challenges, and how accessible this tech is. But let's think about our listener for a second.
Yeah, this is all exciting stuff. But what does it mean for someone who's just starting out with 3D generative AI? Like, where do you even begin?
Yeah, where do you begin? It can feel kind of overwhelming with all this talk of neural networks and stuff. What advice would you give to someone who's totally new to this?
I think the best thing to do is just start exploring. There are tons of resources online. A lot of them are even free. Like NVIDIA's developer website and YouTube channel are good places to start. You can see how the tech works, get an idea of what's possible, and even try out some of the tools yourself.
And there are other resources out there too, right? Like open source projects and
Yeah.
communities where people are sharing what they know and working together on new ideas.
Yeah, definitely. This is a really active field,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of information and support available online. If you're willing to put in a little effort, you can learn a lot pretty quickly.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at like a tipping point with this technology. What used to be, just for research labs and big studios is now becoming something that anyone can use.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that just opens up so many possibilities. I mean, when you give more people these tools, you never know what they'll come up with.
Right. It's like giving a whole new generation of creators a superpower. They
Yeah.
can make things that we couldn't even imagine a few years ago. And it's not just about making things that look cool either.
Yeah, definitely. We talked about architecture and self-driving cars,
Hmm.
but I think there's so much more. Like, imagine using 3D generative AI to design medical implants or create simulations to train surgeons.
Wow. Yeah, that's a whole other level. It shows you how this tech could really change things.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just a cool new gadget. It has the potential to change the way we design and build things,
Yeah.
and even how we interact with the world.
Okay, so let's go back to our sources for a sec. We started with that fun music video from NVIDIA developer, all about the wow factor of 3D generative AI. And then we looked at their deep imagination research page, which got into the technical stuff and all the potential of this technology.
And I think what's really interesting is how NVIDIA is approaching this whole thing. They're not just building the technology, they're creating a whole ecosystem around it, encouraging people to work together. and making the tools more accessible.
Right. And that kind of open approach is probably going to lead to even more innovation. So what's the takeaway for our listener? What do we want them to remember from this deep dive?
I think the main thing is 3D generative AI isn't just a fad. It's a powerful tool that's already changing industries, and it could revolutionize so many parts of our lives. So stay curious, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to come up with the next big thing.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of another deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring the world of 3D generative AI with us. This is just the beginning, though. There's a whole lot more out there to discover. So keep learning, keep experimenting, and let your imagination run wild.